I've got all these tapes, and I don't know what to do with them. I'm just kidding. I know what I'm gonna do with them. Do you have all these tapes? Do you have all these tapes? Do you have all these tapes? We're gonna go through 6 cassettes, 3 Type 1, 3 Type 2s. We're gonna test recording at hot levels, hot preamp levels, and we're gonna test recording at reasonable preamp levels. And we're gonna get some really good data on how you can get the cassette tape sound that you're looking for. I'm gonna talk for a little bit about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, but if you wanna just skip to the tests and the results, that I put the timestamps in the description below, and I would recommend the second test that I do, the drum test. It's much more telling of the character of the tapes than the first keyboard test. Although very, very useful. Yeah, check out that drum video at the end. So I've been buying up old new stock of cassettes for the last couple years, and I've never really done a comparison on what they all sound like. Like, I've recorded on different cassette tapes, and I do find that I notice a difference, especially between Type 1 and Type 2 tapes, but I've never really been able to hear them back to back until I've done these tests right here. So you can do your own research on the difference between Type 1 and Type 2 tapes, but just very briefly know that Type 2 tapes are a little bit harder to find, they're a little bit more expensive, and they, for good reason, that they have much wider bandwidth. Like, they don't roll off as much information in the high end as like some sort of old C60 or C90 or UR90. And because Type 2 tapes use a different oxide to coat the mylar on the spool, they are biased differently. So Type 2 tapes require more energy, like to efficiently record onto the cassette tape, which comparatively results in more headroom. So you'll see that in the test too, that my machine is currently biased for specifically this Maxell XLII. So it's biased for a Type 2 tape. And that doesn't mean that I can't record on a Type 1 tape, but the machine that I'm using is calibrated for optimal efficiency with like a prosumer Type 2 tape. So the Type 1 tapes we'll be testing are a Maxell UL 90-minute, TDK D 90-minute, and a Sony HF 60-minute. It's just what I have lying around. And for the Type 2 tapes, we're going to be testing Maxell XLII and some like kind of nice, like these is cool. We got a TDK Pro, we have the SMX 90, and we have the SAX 100. So there's a Studio Master 90-minute tape, and then there's an audio transfer from CD thing, 100-minute tape. So very briefly explaining how I did the tests and what I wanted to get out of it. So I came into the tests with 2 goals. One of them was repeatability, right? To be able to record to each of the cassettes as consistent as possible. And then the second was to be able to do the same process that I'm doing, at least in some part, on the 4-track just by itself, right? With no processing digitally. So I chose to make my target loudness at the Spotify streaming standard of -14. So all of like the digital mixes and the through output prints of the Tascam are going to be like as close to -14 as I can. And then because of the nature of these tapes, I had to find like an average level of all 6 of the tapes and sort of set that average to -14. So you'll hear like a 3 dB range of loudness that's coming out of these of the different tape formulas, but keeping the sound as true to the recording as I possibly can, right? Making my adjustments with fader volume and then leaving the recordings as they are. And then I chose to share the results in 2 different ways. It's a long listen, but it's worth it, I promise. So the first listening example of the results, we're going to hear all 6 tapes played at normal speed, and then we're going to hear all 6 tapes played at high speed. And we're going to first hear the Type 1s, and then the Type 2s, and then again the Type 1s and Type 2s. And this is so you can hear the difference in the character and the build and the quality of the individual brands and models of tapes. And then the second listening example, we're going to hear the same tape alternating between normal and high speed. And between these two presentations, we should be able to get a really good idea of the way that both tape speed and tape formula will interact with each other during the recording and the playback. So let's jump into the first test. I'm going to be playing my little Yamaha reface keyboard, and I recorded a loop onto my Electro Harmonix 1440 looper pedal, and then sent that into my Tascam with a little bit of EQ. And I am keeping the preamps relatively hot on this recording, that the levels are peaking at like +6. I'm not clipping the machine, but they're peaking at +6. And that's going to play a huge part in the results of this first test. So let's hear the through audio from the looper into the Tascam preamps recorded into Pro Tools, and then we'll go straight into the tape comparison. So I did fail to mention the specific post-processing that was done on these tape recordings, and it was directly related to the results. So my thought is, because I recorded the audio hot onto the tape, the noise floor was so low, and because the keyboard that I'm using is very like mid-heavy, and like the overall tone is sort of lacking in the high end, that we're not really hearing a lot of the character differences of the tapes. So in the interest of accenting some of the tape noise and bringing out some of the bottom end, I made sure to like level match as best I could just a high and low shelf EQ. So like I was very surprised to see how similar all of the audio was. Yes, there are differences in terms of the overall loudness and the point of distortion, and you'll hear some wow and flutter on some of the cheaper cassettes. That yes, you are going to get more headroom in a Type 2 tape. Yes, you are going to get less noise in a Type 2 tape. That yes, the distortion point is going to be lower. That yes, you do feel a little bit more of expanded bandwidth in the high and the low ends, and maybe it's softer in the mid-range. But more importantly than that, it tells me that recording at a high level removes a lot of the inconsistencies from the different types of tape. That may be like a common thread that connects all of this analog process together, is that if you record at a high enough level, without clipping of course, that regardless of the tape type and regardless of the speed, you will preserve the integrity of the sound much better. And now, after curating the listening experience a little bit more, let's hear the side-by-sides of the same tape played at normal and high speed. So jumping into the second test, I wanted to do this very different from the first test, that I needed to still be as consistent, but I really needed to bring out the character of the tapes. I decided to record some drums, and I decided to put more high end in the mix, right? And I also decided to record at a lower volume into the Tascam, that I'm not recording so hot, that I'm peaking really nowhere above +3 dB on the meters. I'm using a Beyerdynamic TGD50 on the kick, a Shure 545 on the snare, and a Cascade Fathead as an overhead. Being all dynamic microphones, in theory, we could record this directly to the machine without any external preamps. So in order to get the drums to be as consistent as the keyboard, I did the initial record into Pro Tools, and I did a little bit of tone shaping, added just a touch of reverb. You know, I'm treating this as though it were a reamp. So they're not the best drums I've recorded, but I made the drums sound good. So then I sent my drum mix down out of Pro Tools through this really nice compressor from FMR Audio. It's super transparent, and I'm just using it to shave off a little bit of the peaks in the kick and the snare, so I'm not going to clip the tape, and I can hit the tape just a little bit harder in general, right? The way you normally use a compressor, right, for taming transients and for predictable output. And then again, some very gentle EQ on the board. So for this listening example, I'm gonna start by playing the digitally recorded audio in Pro Tools, And then I'm going to follow that with the through output print from the Tascam, just the preamps, and then we're going to go into the tape comparison. Yeah, that's the tape comparison that we're looking for right there. So I failed to mention this before we listened, but for this test, I also made sure to standardize where I started on each of the tapes. In the first example, there was some tape wobble that showed up at slow speeds. I made sure to start each of the cassettes at the 100 counter on my Tascam. So not only does this give the tapes a consistent starting point to measure from, but I also noticed that when we don't start at the beginning of the tape, the wobble seems to disappear a little bit. Yeah, I think that this is like solid 10 out of 10 test. It is super, super informative. Even to the point of the tape wobble, I felt that it totally disappeared. Although it is a little bit harder to hear on a drum set. And then everything else behaved basically as I expected it to. But it's just nice specifically to hear what each of these limitations sounds like. So what did I find interesting? I found it was interesting that playing the Type 1 tapes at a high speed preserves roughly as, it feels so close to like a Type 2 played at normal speed. So that just shows how dramatic the tape speed affects the quality of the sound. And I didn't hear it on the first pass when I recorded this yesterday, but I heard a difference between the two TDK tapes. So the SAX90 is advertised at slightly like higher specs than the SMX90. So the studio audio tape versus the studio master tape. That both of the pro tapes seem to have a slightly lower noise floor and slightly more crispy highs than the Maxell XLII. I mean, it's certainly not as dramatic of a difference as like a Type 1 versus a Type 2, but the SAX versus the SMX, the the Studio Master, the purple one, like I feel like somewhere in like the 4-6K region was a little bit shinier, and the SAX, the yellow one, seems like it was a little bit smoother in the upper range. So again, that's probably what they're advertised for, right? The SAX is designed as like a transfer from CD, transfer from vinyl medium, and the SMX is advertised as a place to put your studio masters on. So for the audiophiles, the smoother high end is probably what you're looking for, and for the studio musicians, you're probably looking to have more of the high end preserved more authentically. So I think that covers all my bases for what I wanted to talk about. Let's listen to the second comparison where we'll hear each of the tapes A-B'd between the normal and the high speed, and how dramatic of a difference that is on the Type 1 tapes, and let's see how much of a difference we hear on the Type 2s. So going through the numbers on the edit, I think it'd be good to add some meaningful conclusions. And I think that I can safely say two things. I can say that compared to Type 1 tapes, Type 2 tapes have a higher dynamic range and they have a wider tonal range. And then I can also say that compared to normal speed, high speed recording also has a higher dynamic range and a wider tonal range. And I'll put the numbers on screen for the drum recording so you can, pick apart what you want to pick apart. We can see that going from Type 1 tapes to Type 2 tapes, that the Type 2 tapes play back less loud, and they also have a higher true peak. And we may be splitting hairs, that everything here is within, less than a dB of difference. And I'm doing the metering on like a free loudness plugin, so take all of this with a grain of salt, I suppose, and let your ears be the judge as to what you're going for and what you're looking for in the end. But because we have higher true peaks in the Type 2s, and because we have a lower average loudness in the Type 2s, that tells me that a Type 2 tape is able to record a higher volume of sound than a Type 1 tape. And it tells me that it's able to do that with less distortion and less tape compression. Again, considering the condition of the tapes and the fact that my machine is biased for a Type 2 cassette. But then independent of the bias and the quality of the tape, if we compare tape to tape, we can see that same exact phenomenon happening when we go from normal to high speed. But we see it in a slightly different way. That at high speed, we can see that the true peaks are lower than at normal speed. And we can see that the average volume is lower than compared to normal speed. So that means to me that at a higher speed, we are either able to push the tape harder if we want, or we have the freedom to not push the tape as hard, along with the added benefit of less tape noise and more tonal range from being played at a high speed. So it's probably safe to say that recording your masters at high speed on a Type 2 tape is is that the way to go. Or if you want to roll off a little bit of high end on your drum kit as you're recording, maybe you record it at normal speed on a nice Type 2 tape. Or if you're looking to smooth out a little bit of high end on your vocals and add a little bit of tape warmth, recording at high speed on a Type 2 tape might be the right decision. Or if you're looking to add some fuzz and distortion to a kick drum, maybe recording at normal speed on a Type 1 tape is the way to go. And this is, certainly no substitute for working with like a multi-track reel-to-reel, or if you're, going to a studio that has some 2-inch tape and they know how to use it and they have great outboard gear, and you really want to do things in that way, that this is not that. This is like the Kraft mac and cheese of tape warmth. It's the Indomie noodles of tape warmth. That it's a portable studio, and like the utility of this thing and the utility of the cassettes have like completely reshaped my workflow, and I find it to be like such a valuable production and composition device that it's simplified my creativity to this single unit and then about 5 or 6 plugins inside the box. And now, knowing very much better than I did before how the different tapes and the different speeds affect the playback, I feel like I have a far greater palette and understanding of the practical use of cassettes in a 2026 hybrid studio. That having a couple decent outboard preamps, having a halfway decent compressor, having a couple plugins, having a 4-track, and knowing how to work a DAW, especially if this is the kind of sound that you're chasing, right? If a little bit of grit and a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of like the authenticity of the tape and a little bit of the process of recording direct to tape inspires you, then it doesn't take a whole lot to make it work. So I thought I'd give one more comparison at the end of this video just to sort of summarize how broad the spectrum is between tape speed and tape type. I found the Sony HF 60 to be between that and the Maxell's like not really. It's like they're both pretty bad at slow speeds. They're both real nasty. I mean, I found the tone of the Maxell to be more appealing than the tone of the Sony, and the noise floor on the Sony is pretty gross too. So I'm going to put the Sony HF 60 played at normal speed against the TDK Pro SMX 90 played at high speed. So in theory, between tape type and playback speed, you should be able to achieve any level of fidelity between the Sony at normal speed and the TDK played at high speed. That, like any consumer grade Walmart brand cassette and a premium Type 2 cassette that unfortunately are getting harder and harder to find. So I hope you found this useful. I know that I found it useful, and I look forward to coming back with more fun explorations along the way. Thank you very much, and enjoy the final comparison.